So, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to everyone. I am officially opening this webinar on applying humanitarian principles in context. And this is Alessia Messuti. I'm speaking from Italy, from the International Training Center of the International Labour Organization. And I hope you can all see me well through the video, and you can also hear me well while I'm speaking. Just to do a quick check, I would like to ask the participants who have been joining the webinar so far. We have about 14 participants in total, including also Tim that is joining. Can you please quickly write me in the chat if you are hearing me well, so that I'm just double checking if the webinar is running smoothly and have a kind of feedback from your side. Okay, so I see you are hearing me well. Okay, thank you very much for your feedback. As I said before, I'm very happy to open this first webinar we are running within the framework of the massive open online course on Humanitarian Essentials. As some of you know, this is the first massive open online course that we have been building upon the Humanitarian Essential pathway that is offered on kayaconnect.org. And the MOOC already started about 3 weeks ago, and we are now about to end the 4th week of the massive open online course. This week on Friday, we are going to cross the finishing line of the MOOC. But we were happy to offer you an opportunity to further discuss how to apply humanitarian principles in context. For those of you who could not follow the massive open online course smoothly from the beginning, just for you to know, it was a 4-week massive open online course, and it was segmented in different thematics and topics, building up on the humanitarian essential pathway. So we had the opportunity to go through understanding humanitarian principle and standards, and this understanding the international legal framework, but also understanding how to approach age, gender, and diversity within the humanitarian sector, and how to make them work. So this last week is actually more tackling the practical side of applying humanitarian principle in context, and we are actually having interesting discussion with all the participants, and also looking forward to case studies that have been submitted by all the registered participants in the MOOC. So this webinar should really be an opportunity for you to hear more about some practices in the field, and also have an opportunity to discuss and interact directly with the tutor of the massive open online course. Just to give you, before we start, just to give you some quick instruction about this webinar. We are recommending you to connect if you have the opportunity to have a good quality microphone or headset, so that of course you are not accessing the audio smoothly. And also, if you would like to interact with me or with the tutor later on through the microphone, please make sure that this is connected. You will have the opportunity later on to ask questions or provide some comments. If you want to do so in voice, please make sure you raise your hands, and we will make sure that you have the opportunity to speak and share your questions with the community. Webcam is optional. I'm now having the webcam open so that you can see the face behind the webinar, but it's not necessary for you to connect throughout the whole session. And also, we are asking you to close other programs that could maybe prevent, let's say, a smooth webinar access. The webinar is going to last for about 1 hour, and so make sure that you don't have too many apps or too many programs open at the same time, because we know that the bandwidth could be an issue during a live stream. So these were just a few technical tips before we officially start the massive open online course. I'm going now to just briefly introduce you what are the objectives of this webinar. As I said before, the webinar is offered within the framework of the massive open online course, but is of course open to also broader audience, people that could not participate actively in the massive open online course, but are still interested in the essentials of humanitarian response and actually in the application of humanitarian principles. So for today, we thought that we could use this 1 hour webinar to reflect further on how to apply this principle in context by actually explaining some of the dilemmas that basically are presented throughout humanitarian interventions. And we would also like to summarize the discussions we had in week 1, week 2, and week 3 of the massive open online course to see what type of ingredients could be useful in this discussion, also for the application of humanitarian principles in context. And finally, for those of you who are participating in the MOOC, we hope that this webinar could provide you with some food for thought for writing a case study, so that in order to explain how to apply the knowledge of humanitarian principle to your individual working context. I just remind you that the case study is one of the activity that is outlined in the MOOC and is very useful is one of the let's say the item you should fulfill in order to get a certificate in the MOOC. So these were more or less 3 objectives we had in mind for this 1 hour webinar, and I'm not alone in running this webinar. I'm pleased to present you, to introduce you to basically the tutor of the massive open online course, Gudrun. Gudrun was helping us and supporting us since the beginning of this massive open online course. She has been following up with all the learners throughout the past 3 weeks, making sure that nice interactions and reflections are provided, and also supporting you in framing further your information and knowledge towards the submission of a case study during the final week of the course. As you can see from the screen, Gudrun is an expert in humanitarian affairs. She has been working also for UN agencies such as UN OCHA on humanitarian civil-military coordination and also emergency response. She also has been a part of working for the Conflict Prevention Center and War Management for OSCE, and she's going to share her experience today throughout this 1 hour webinar with a particular reference to the 4 dilemmas that that we are facing when it's about applying humanitarian principle in context. I would like now to ask Gudrun if she can unmute her microphone, if she can also introduce herself properly to the audience. Gudrun, over to you.
Yes. Hello. Good morning and good afternoon or good evening to whoever is attending. It's my pleasure to be with you here during the webinar and also to have acted as a tutor in the past weeks. So I'm looking forward to sharing some of my thoughts and experiences with you in the next 20 to 25 minutes. And we've prepared some dilemmas for you, and we've tried to make this interactive. So we're looking forward to your contributions and to your opinions, and to see what you think on those dilemmas and how you would act. Yeah. So I think without further ado, we can start with a presentation of some slides and some dilemmas. It should last about 20 to 25 minutes. And then afterwards, we have some time for questions, of course. Yeah. This webinar really tries to build on the discussions that we had in the past weeks, and maybe you have noticed, but there was a kind of logic in the questions that I asked you in the discussion forums. As if you remember, in the first week we talked about humanitarian principles and standards, and I really tried to take you through a kind of identification phase, if I may say that, yeah, to have you reflect, why do we need those principles and standards? Why are they so important? Because not only they make us who we are, but it is also the way we work. They make our work more effective and efficient. And if we work in such complicated contexts, we need to know who we are and how we are supposed to work and what we're supposed to do. So that's also why I asked you why you wanted to become a humanitarian worker. So to check on your motivation as such. In week 2 then, if you remember, we Alessia, yeah. Perfect. We looked at the humanitarian context, the context in which we operate. And yes, it's a complicated context. There are many actors. And if we want it or not, we have to work together with these actors. Not with everybody. I mean, we have to share information with most of them. But we are confronted with a number of challenges in terms of working together. And despite many efforts, I don't think we are still very good at working together. There's still a number of challenges, but there are also a number of good practices, luckily. And thank you very much for sharing your good practices in the forum in week 2. Also there we looked at the international legal framework, and I explicitly asked you to reflect on how conflicts have changed, how conflict response has changed in the last 20 to 30 years, because it did affect our work. Yeah, we work more often in internal conflict, and that requires a number of adaptation strategies, if I may call them that way. Then in week three, so last week, you had the opportunity to become familiar with the age, gender, and diversity approach, to going through the learning context. And in our discussions, we actually had like 2 parts. First was more theoretical, or some of you have called it philosophical, part of the week, to discuss the statement of equal treatment does not lead to equality. I think most of us agreed that no, equal treatment does not lead to equality. In practice, however, we have seen that it confronts us with a number of challenges, and it's not that easy as we would like it to be. We discussed in more details how to locate vulnerable populations, disabled children, old people, etc. Now, at the end of this week 3 topic, I'd like to emphasize that being vulnerable does not mean being weak. Also, vulnerable people have strengths and capacities that we can build on to improve our response and to improve the aid to people in need. Yeah. Now we are in week 4, as you know, and this is, as Alessia already said, it's about applying humanitarian principles. Yeah. Why is it so difficult? I mean, on paper, it seems so logic, right? There are a number of reasons for it, and without claiming to be exhaustive, I think we can discuss maybe the 3 reasons why it is also so difficult. First of all, it's not about our intention to stick to the principles, yes or no. It's also about the perceptions. How do authorities, how do beneficiaries, how do partners, how do conflict parties perceive us abiding to the humanitarian principles, yes or no? So that makes it very complex. Talking about complexity, it's also the context that is complex. Yeah, we're working in crisis situations, and crisis situations by definition are chaotic, and there's nothing that works the way it's supposed to be. I mean, that's the reason why we're there, right? So that's a fact, it's a reality that we have to work with. And then also third, each context is different. You can work 20 years in one country. If you move to the next, you'll have to learn again how to apply humanitarian principles in that context. I think we can also see a number of trends when it comes to humanitarian assistance in the last 20 to 30 years. First of all, it's about expansion of the needs, about the demand for humanitarian assistance, but also expansion on the supply side. There are many humanitarian actors at the moment, but also non-humanitarian actors, they increasingly tend to refer to the humanitarian principles, and maybe use those humanitarian principles, even if it contradicts their mandate. So we are a bit of a victim of our own success here. Second, our sector has never been so professional. You can study humanitarian assistance, you can make a career in it. I mean, we should be able to do our work in a proper manner. And the third trend is, of course, this so-called comprehensive and coherent approach. Yes, we're not working in isolation anymore, and that affects our perception on independence as well. In the next slides, we'll see the 4 principles, and we have prepared for each principle a dilemma. And for each dilemma, we have prepared a poll in which you can participate and tell us how you feel about it. Yeah. The first dilemma is, of course, actually a core principle, discusses the core principle of humanity. I mean, it's actually a contradiction that we are supposed to alleviate suffering and respect dignity, but conflicts are a returning reality. Yeah. And in this case here, I'd like to refer, as you see on the picture as well, to the Rohingya crisis in Myanmar, which was also discussed and brought up at the social forum. As you may know, the Rohingya are a Muslim minority group, and they're considered one of the most persecuted people around the world. They're stateless, yeah. And since August 2017, over 600,000 additional refugees have fled to Bangladesh away from the violence in Myanmar. Of course, Bangladesh is struggling with having to look after 800,000 refugees in the refugee camps. Yeah. Now, the dilemma here is, what if providing assistance to people would actually mean replacing responsibilities of the national government? I'd like to hear your opinion on what would you do. Do you think in those cases we have to provide assistance, or we should not provide assistance because we are replacing these responsibilities? Alessia is now going to open a poll in which you can contribute. It's opening for 30 seconds, so you'll have to be very, very quick. Yeah, and telling us if you would provide assistance in these cases or rather not to. Okay, everybody provided his or her answer? Yeah? Okay. Perfect. Great. I mean, in such cases, it's actually a... Alessia, can you actually see the results of the poll?
Yes, yes, I can see the results, and actually, I'm sharing the results. Can you see them?
Yes, we can see them. So it's about 75% of you that responded that he or she would provide assistance, and 25% said not to provide assistance. It's a very nice division of answers, I would say. Indeed, it is not an easy decision to be made, but even in such crisis, I think it's a good practice to remember the goal of humanitarian assistance. And our key consideration is the principle of humanity. That is what we do. We try to alleviate suffering. But solving political crisis, that is not our responsibility. Yeah? We have to do our work and advocate for the people in need and look after their protection. But of course, I understand it's difficult if you work in these situations, and there is no changes that can be expected. Yeah, it was also discussed by one of you in the social forum. We as humanitarians, we have little influence on the political agenda, and that may result in feeling powerless and might get you frustrated. Yeah, you can work on a short term, but not on a long term. However, I'd like to emphasize here that it would be bad from us to offer political solutions or taking political statements for the simple reason that it might impact our perceived neutrality. It might impact our work. Authorities might see you to take sides, and even if you think that you're simply addressing injustice. So what does that mean for you as humanitarian? It is actually to, again, go back to our humanitarian identity, what we've seen in week 1, and then make a conscious choice if you can live with these limitations. Yeah, that's also what I say to people living on political missions. They become political tools. Yeah, but as a humanitarian, you will have to accept that there are issues that you will have little influence on. Actually, in Myanmar, the United Nations and its partners, they are working closely together with the government of Bangladesh to scale up the coordinate humanitarian response, and of course also to put pressure on the government of Myanmar to look for a political solution for this catastrophic emergency, if I may say it. Yeah. Okay, let us move to our second dilemma on neutrality. Exactly. Here, I actually like to point out the contradiction of the fact that we cannot favor one party or back a particular ideology, but we have sometimes very limited humanitarian space to operate in. And the case study I'd like to refer to here is Afghanistan, where the security situation had a clear impact on our work, and it limited the freedom and flexibility to operate. In these cases, it was clear that humanitarian principles alone were no longer a sufficient shield to protect us, our activities, and our beneficiaries. So it can happen that you're confronted with difficult decisions and to be made, and dilemmas such as the one that you see here on the screen under the poll, that what are you going to do if population can only be reached by a military escort or by providing or by having the military provide assistance? Would you decide to provide assistance under these circumstances by using military escorts, or would you say, no, I'm not providing assistance under these circumstances? Maybe Alessia, if you can pull up the second poll, great, perfect. So again, you have about 30 seconds to provide us with your answer, and then we can see the results of the poll. Okay. I think that should be enough time for you. All of you would provide assistance and use military escorts. That's an interesting one, yeah? There are actually many different opinions on the use of military escorts. Now, there are some guidelines, and it is what I wanted to point out to you, that if you think that you need military or civil defense support to provide assistance, have a look at the UN CIMCORD guidelines, Civil Military Coordination Guidelines. They are simply to be found on the web. And there it actually says that it depends very much on the context if you can accept military support, yes or no. In a natural disaster situation, it will be much easier and much more straightforward than in a conflict situation. It will also depend on the type of assistance. Maybe military can help you with some infrastructure support, but they will not be the one handing out the food to the beneficiaries directly. Yeah? And even if you accept this military assistance, it will be on a number of conditions, like last resort, civil control, and clear marking, clear identification of what is a military vehicle and what is not a military vehicle. You can imagine that having a military helicopter dropping food one day and dropping bombs the next day is going to be a best recipe for suffering and death, yeah. But of course, on the short term, military support might seem as an easy solution, sometimes even a cheaper solution, a safer solution, but you'll have to think on the long terms, yeah. Because what does that mean if you're seen together with the military? Will it affect neutrality? Even if you're not taking sides, if you do not intend taking sides, it will be perceived that way. It might be perceived that way. Yeah. So just simply deciding to use military assistance without a proper reflection on its implication, that could be very, very dangerous. Not only for you, also for your colleagues, and especially for the people in need. What does that mean for you? Again, it's about knowing our mandate and knowing the mandate of the others. And in fact, in a maybe ideal world, if everybody would do his or her job the way it's supposed to be, if the military would provide us with the necessary security for us to operate, we would not need their involvement in our work. Yeah, I would also advise you to know the policy of your organization in terms of using military escorts. Each organization may have a different policy when it comes to that. Yeah. Okay, thank you for your contribution. Let's move to our third dilemma, which is about the principle of impartiality. Yeah. We like to distribute aid on the basis of non-discrimination and needs only, but unfortunately, we work in very politicized context. And in these contexts, it's actually the difference between people that cause conflicts. Yeah. So there's always a risk for humanitarian assistance to be used as a tool in those conflicts. And in this context here, you see it on the picture again, I'd like to refer to Syria and the provision of aid by faith-based NGOs, both Christian and Muslim NGOs, and also by the use of religion in this conflict as really a tool in this conflict. For that reason, I'd like to ask your opinion on the following question. What if providing assistance to one religious group only is the condition for having humanitarian access by the controlling party? What would you do? Yeah, Alessia is going to show you the poll, and again, you have a few seconds to answer. Okay, I hope you're all ready by now. Let us have a look at the results of the poll. We are very, very divided, if I see it correctly. Yes, it's a very difficult question. I mean, that is why we're discussing them. Yeah. I also don't have a proper answer to this question. Yeah. But what I do have is the advice that you should always negotiate access. You cannot just simply accept the conditions without any negotiation. Yeah. In the end, they're also humans you're talking with, so maybe you can also have a human connection here. Maybe. Yeah. There are differences between organizations on what is acceptable and what is not. Yeah. But it makes it clear, because the reason it's so difficult is because we have two principles here that are conflicting. The fact, on the one side you have humanity, and the other side you have impartiality. Yes, we want to provide assistance, but if we only do that for one side, what implication is that going to have again on our perceived neutrality, on our perceived impartiality? We don't know if the needs on one side are actually the largest. Yeah, so we can be seen as favoring one side. We can be seen as strengthening one side. So that is a risk, of course. Now it can happen, and that's why I'm also referring to Syria in this context, that NGOs can only work on one side of the conflict line. Yeah. And in Syria, they have to choose, for example, if they'd like to work in the non-government controlled area or the government controlled areas. They can just simply not work in both because they simply don't get also permission to work in both. Yeah? It can happen that a Christian-based or Muslim-based NGOs receive permission in one area and the other in the other area. So the solution there is, again, to work together to build on the strengths of organizations, to split responsibility and coordinate to reach global impartiality. Yeah, but it is a fact, conflicts are politicized and influenced by religion, and impartiality is an extremely difficult one. But it's not only political actors guilty to this, it's also NGOs, religious-based, faith-based NGOs that just have a tendency to first give assistance to people of the same religion. Now you can of course ask yourself if these NGOs are still humanitarians, yes or no. What does it mean for you? You should always strive for impartiality, but you should accept that sometimes conflict will limit it, and sometimes we will need to give assistance only to a few people, even though we would like to serve everybody. Of course, everybody needs. But it's a very difficult dilemma, I agree. Okay, that brings us to our fourth dilemma on independence, indeed. Normally, if we think about the dilemma of independence, we think of donors trying to influence our work. Yeah, they have some political or strategic preferences where we should work or whom we should serve. Yeah, indeed, it can be challenging. But here I would like to refer to the definition of NGOs, namely that NGOs can receive funding from political actors as long as those political actors are not member of their board. That means that as long as political actors are not taking the operational decisions. Yeah, so maybe just a reminder for you. And here I also like to refer to the growing focus on unearmarked funding to allow us to have the liberty, the flexibility to decide and to go where the needs are the highest. Yeah. Here on this slide, you see, I like to refer to a slightly different dilemma when it comes to independence. Yeah, it's about the need for autonomous operational decisions, but who are we now accountable to? I'd like to refer to the case study of Nepal, and especially after the earthquake in 2016, many humanitarian actors, they noted the interest of the government to keep control of the incoming humanitarian assistance. Now, actually, humanitarian actors are not too familiar with the national government being very involved in the coordination and delivery of assistance after natural disaster situations. So that's why I am asking you this question here is, the national government would like you to adhere to their standards in natural disaster situations. Are you going to accept it and provide assistance or not? What do you think? Okay, did everybody answer the question? All of you is going to provide assistance. That's very nice to hear. Yeah, and you're right. In a country, you'll have to respect the national laws. We should not forget you're a guest in a country, and of course, in a natural disaster situation, that's slightly easier than in a conflict. It's also the responsibility of the national government to coordinate aid in their country. Now, in most cases, the internationals do take over because of a lacking capacity of the national authorities to do so. So yes, you'll have an interest to follow their standards. However, I would advise you to take into account the following challenges. Yeah, because are you sure that these standards are properly based on the needs, the actual needs of the population? Yeah. Do they respect the principle of humanity? Or are those standards and preference an indication of political reasoning? Yeah, maybe national governments have different preferences after a natural disaster. Yeah, such as long-term focus, but maybe also on economic interests, etc. Furthermore, you may have been used to work along different standards in your work. So that adaptation to the national standards, that may have a negative impact on the efficiency of your programs. Each NGO has its own way of working, so that might be difficult. But it would actually not be too good, first of all, to simply ignore it as something you cannot do. That would go against respect and ownership, but also not simply accept it. Yeah, your first accountability is to the people in need, not to the government. So simply accept it maybe not in clean natural disaster situation, but if there's some tension in a society, simply accepting it would make you seem dependent and go against the principle of humanity. Yeah. So what does it mean for you? You should remember that international assistance is only needed when local actors are overwhelmed. International actors, they can only come to help after an international request for assistance. Yeah, and it's actually a good thing if nationals indicate that they can manage it. That is actually the ideal situation, but it's not how this international system is built like at the moment. Yeah, that's why strengthening national and local capacity is currently seen as the most effective, efficient, and sustainable manner to respond to emergency. It also fits into the recommendations and commitments of the World Humanitarian Summit to strengthen those capacities, and that is also why it's important for the MOOC here to build those national and local capacities as such. Okay, let's move to the conclusions before we have time for some questions. Yeah, so in conclusion, what I'd like you to take away from these few dilemmas and many more out there, of course, yeah, but it is for you to make conscious decisions when you have to compromise or where you have to limit the humanitarian principles. And these decisions should be made on a proper analysis of the context, the needs of the people, the possibility, but especially the possible implications that compromising these principles may have for your work, but especially for the people in need. Therefore, it will be needed sometimes to find creative, adapted solutions and pragmatic approaches, as long as we have the humanitarian principles and the humanitarian imperative guiding our work. Humanitarian principles are our ideal way of working, but however, it's not an ideal world out there. At the minimum, I think we should try as humanitarians to apply a conflict-sensitive approach, which I mean that we should not allow our work to contribute to conflict, and we should not allow our work to extend the needs of the people or to make them worse. So alleviating human suffering is what we're supposed to do, and this should be our core driving at all times, in all countries, by all of our staff. So I thank you for your attention and participation in those few slides and those few reflections, and I'm looking forward to your questions and to have maybe some discussions.
Thank you, Gudrun. Thank you. That was really interesting. And actually, we had some comments and questions while you were going through the short presentation. And we had a few comments and questions from participants in the chat. So if you want, I can just read to you, and then we can probably try to address them in the webinar. Or if you need then some more time, we can also decide that some of these questions could be addressed later on in the Massive Open Online Course forum. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure. Sure.
Yeah. So I'll go ahead. We have a comment from Mzamo and says that I think he refers to one of the first dilemma you share with us, and says, what if we use military vehicles and change the stickers or labels to represent humanitarian vehicles? Mm-hmm. This question.
Yeah, sure. I would advise you to read through the guidelines. In those guidelines, you clearly see some advice on how to mark military vehicles as humanitarian vehicles. Yeah, that means that in practice, sometimes military helicopters they are painted white. Yeah, but what is very important that they are clearly marked as a helicopter flying for UNHCR or another humanitarian actor. For example, a helicopter should also be marked that way from on the bottom of the helicopter, so that people on the ground can see it. Yeah, so they have done that in the past to have military vehicles. They just repaint it. They repaint it white. Yeah, and they have to take off, I think, also their weapons, of course. I mean, there are all kinds of interesting details that you can find more explanation about in those guidelines. But yes, it's absolutely a precondition. If military vehicles or vehicles of the security sector overall are directly providing humanitarian assistance, they should not be seen as a military item as such. Of course, it depends on the context. Yeah, we have seen it in Haiti as well, where we had the peace mission after the earthquake delivering humanitarian assistance. It was not an ideal situation over there, but of course, if you're confronted with such needs, sometimes you just have to do that. The military support is last resort and should stay that way.
Thank you. Thank you. I hope this clarified, and if there are any further comments or feedback, feel free to write in the chat, or or raise your hand if you want to interact directly with Gudrun on this particular aspect. Otherwise, I can also go ahead with the second comment or question we got in the chat, which comes from Kuldeep. I hope my pronunciation is good. The question is, would a humanitarian professional only take humanitarian response in crisis, or would we also try for permanent settlement of crisis? Or do we have no duty when we have a strong anticipation of crisis?
I'm trying to understand the question because I think there are several elements in that question. Yeah. First of all, should humanitarians work towards a permanent settlement of crisis? So is that now a political solution that is being meant? Maybe, Kuldeep, could you share some more details on your question, or take up the micro? I don't know.
Yeah, also just to complement this comment, there is also another part of the comment I saw later, which basically says, is it not the responsibility of international humanitarian actors making local actors skillful for humanitarian crises?
Yeah, I mean, to that question, absolutely. Absolutely, and especially these days with the Grand Bargain commitments, to which I've referred to several times, also in the forum, it's clear that international humanitarian actors, but also other actors, have the responsibility to build capacities of local and national actors. And so, also, more and more of the assistance should be delivered by local actors, but that requires, of course, proper capacity building programs. That I mean, local response has been found to be much more efficient, more effective, cheaper as well, of course, but there's often no need to fly in expensive internationals if the locals can do it with some support in terms of building their capacities. Absolutely.
Gudrun, we also have Kuldeep raising his hand, so
Yeah.
maybe I give the floor and you can further explain.
Sure.
Kuldeep, can you open your microphone and speak?
Hello.
Hello, Kuldeep.
Kuldeep, sorry, we cannot hear you well. Hi Kuldeep, sorry, can you probably stop your video because we cannot hear very well your voice, your audio.
Yes, I will go to the sub. Yeah, there I will.
Now it's better.
Yeah. Yes, are you getting?
Yeah, sure, please go ahead.
Yeah. So I would like to ask the thing that when a situation anticipation is like that, suppose now we can take the example of Rohingya. When that crisis is going on, the adjacent countries also have some hues and cries and rumors are going on in my local state also. So there is a kind of anticipation from different parts. In those situations, when there is a kind of anticipation is there, would the humanitarian workers have some duty to anticipate that crisis when it is a political in nature? The same thing in all the parts of the question, what I mean.
Okay. There are two levels of answer to your question. And at first, at the political level, you often see that there is early warning. I mean, there's often enough information to know when a crisis is going on, when a conflict is going to take place. In my experience, and I also worked with more political actors on this, and especially on this niche and on this difficulty, it's not the early warning that is a problem, it's the early action. Yeah? That means that sometimes we have information, but there's just no political will to act. We have seen it also in the genocide in Rwanda, which was the same. There were clear indications that something was going to happen. Same with the Rohingya crisis. I mean, this is going on for decades. It's not a new thing, but we're still very, very slow. And we as political actors now are still very, very slow in acting. Now, the second level of answer is, of course, from the humanitarians. Yes, humanitarians also have and had signs of crises, and they have the responsibility. I think that when a crisis is to be expected, that they can take precautions and they start planning and preparing for such a crisis. And partly this is being done, but we realize that we still have a lot of work to do in terms of preparedness. Now, response preparedness is something that is much needed. Everybody recognizes it, but it's hampering because of a number of reasons. And one of the main reasons is unfortunately the funding. It's difficult to get funding for response preparedness as such. Also, it's difficult because you can, if you prevent something, it's difficult to show results afterwards. And unfortunately, these days we're working in a very result-based management approach. So we have to show results all the time. And then, of course, difficult to argument to a donor like we had a good preparedness, we had a good prevention. So there are all kinds of elements connected to that. But absolutely, we have to improve our response preparedness, and we can do it much better than we're doing at the moment.
Thank you, Gudrun. I still have a couple of comments we can address through the webinar, and then we move ahead towards the conclusion. We have a couple of questions from Alessandra. Alessandra was asking, among humanitarian organizations, what is the trend in decision-making when a dilemma presents itself? Do humanitarian organizations always go for saving the biggest number of persons affected by the crisis?
That will really depend. I haven't seen a trend when it comes to that, actually, for saving the biggest number of people. You're referring, of course, also to the concept of reach. What do we mean by reach and improving our reach? Is it by saving more people, or is it by providing better quality response and better quality aid to certain kinds of people? Of course, it shows always better to have reached more people, so in quantitative terms. But I'm not sure that's always the solution, though. So no, I haven't seen a trend for that. Probably, maybe the biggest number, but I cannot confirm. I hope this helps.
Yeah, there was the second. I think the second comment by Alessandra was, I think, somehow related. It was related to this first question. She was actually wondering if humanity always. I mean, doesn't humanity always win if compared with the other principle? This was a follow-up comment on the first question.
Sure, I think humanity is actually the core principle. I mean, this is why we do our work. Yeah, because we want to alleviate suffering. We want to help people in need. So I think it always comes back to the humanity question. If humanity is always winning, probably, maybe even not. It's of course, it's not an easy question you're asking, of course, but I mean, humanity means that we should help everybody, and based on need as well. So in humanity, everything is already there. So no, unfortunately, I don't think so. No. So I hope this helps, but it's a very good question, and I'll certainly will do some more reflections on that.
Yeah. Thank you. Alessandra, do you want to add anything or to share any thought around that? We can for sure try to compile all the comments we got in the chat and kind of have a sort of a further reflection also in the forum of the MOOC, so that it can also be helpful for those who could not join. Yeah, we also are getting a comment from Kuldeep that was saying that your answer before was good, got a clear picture about it, and he was also appreciating the fact that he could access to the massive open online course.
That's great to hear.
We also have Alessandra trying to connect. I see her on video, but probably she has problems with the microphone. Can you confirm, Alessandra? Can you? Oh, am I muting you?
I think now now I got it. Thank you very much. I wasn't able to access via microphone. No, thank you very much, Gudrun, for your answer. I think my main point was trying to have like one really core principle that would help a humanitarian always take the right decision. So I was looking for an easy way out of it, which is not there. But because I always think, if there is an emergency and if there is, people on the ground are pressed by a volatile environment, by, the pressure of having to save lives and taking decision, and then what is the first thought that you think about then? Is it, I'll have to save as many people as I can. This is what I go for. So I guess my point was that. But your point is yes, that is important, but we also need to think in the long term. What will happen if I take, the easiest decision based on only on humanity? So this is a point that I take, and thank you very much for that. So we need to think about all the other principles as well, because there is always long term, because there is always quality that we need to think about, and many other issues that you have already laid out. So thanks.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, you have good points. I mean, it's indeed, if you're under time pressure and just after an emergency, this is what you do first. You just try to help anybody that you see, no matter just you address the need that is there. But of course, it risks that if you do that so quickly, that you risk to forget people. You risk to forget as we said also last week, to the disabled children that are hidden in the house, or the old people, or etc. etc. So no, I think we should be critical to ourselves, severe to ourselves, demanding to ourselves, that even if we're under time pressure, we have to do a good job. That cannot be simply the excuse we have no time to think about the other principles. So I hope this was a bit of a reflection.
Thank you, Gudrun. Thank you, Alessandra. Thank you all for the nice comments and interesting questions. I wrote in the chat that just have to keep an eye on time, and we're going to move towards the conclusion of the webinar. But if there is any other follow-up comment or question you may want to write in the chat, please do so. We can try to compile all of them and then move this discussion into the Massive Open Online Course forum, where this discussion can also be opened up to all the participants who could not join this live session today. And also to move towards conclusion, I just also wanted to highlight the fact that some of the topics that we had the opportunity to discuss today through the webinar are also available. There are available related resources on Kaya, so you can we put them on screen, and we can share this presentation for you. With you later on, so that you can also manage to access independently from this webinar those courses that are actually tackling the 4 dilemmas that were actually described and outlined by Gudrun throughout different cases and experiences. So feel free to go back to Kaya, not only for accessing the Massive Open Online course, but also to have access to these 5 courses on advanced learning on humanitarian principles: humanity, impartiality, neutrality, and independence. And just also to build up on this, for those of you who are taking the course with us, just as I outlined at the beginning of this webinar, we are now in the 4th week of the Massive Open Online course. I'm actually very pleased that we managed to compile more than 2,000 participants who have joined us throughout this learning journey. We were very glad to reach out to so many professionals. And since now we are running towards the end of the MOOC, we just wanted to also take the opportunity of this webinar to remind you about the certificate requirements, so that I know that you probably know them very well, but just make sure that you manage to complete all the knowledge checks that are provided throughout the first 3 weeks of the MOOC, that you also manage to ensure contribution in the 3 weekly forum that were initiated by Gudrun in week 1, 2, and 3, so that we also can gather your comments, experience regarding the 3 main topics that were raised in the forum. And last but not least, remember that we have a deadline on 10th of November for the submission of the case study, which is actually about your experience and on the application of humanitarian principles. So we're looking forward to receive your case study as well. We have now reached about if I remember well, there were about 25 case studies until 2 days ago. So this is very rich content for us, and we are looking forward to more submission towards the end of the week, so that we can compile real experience from the field and from your actual work. So this was basically the conclusion from my side, and I hope you are enjoying the MOOC. And I hope that you also found this webinar a useful opportunity for you to go deeper on the practical dimension of applying humanitarian principles in the humanitarian context. The webinar was recorded, so that after this live session, you will be able to access also a recording of this webinar on the MOOC platform on Kaya. I don't have any other closing remark. Gudrun, over to you if you want to add anything else. I see many participants are writing in the chat that their final comments or remarks.
Okay, maybe just on a final note, I'd like to thank you all for your contributions and sharing your experience. And I think we had some really good discussions, not only here, but also in the past 3 to 4 weeks. And I think I can simply invite you to continue the learning and continue to be self-critical. So in order that we all can improve our work, there's enough to do, and I think we have a responsibility towards the people in need to just simply provide the best assistance that we can. So I think that's just a final note that I wanted to make.
Okay. Thank you very much then for your attention, for your patience, and looking forward to the next steps in the MOOC. Have a nice day.
Have a nice day. Bye.